Hi, and welcome to Talking Wildfire. Today we're here with Davis Perkins, and Davis has lived a really unique life of adventure. And today he's going to tell us a bit about how he started and his life and what he does. Davis is also a really important painter in the Central California region, and his work has been displayed in the Smithsonian Institute. This is Davis Perkins. Can you tell us where you grew up and a little bit about your life?
Hi. Yes, I was born and raised in Oregon. My grandfather, when he was an attorney and also a farmer, he had a beautiful place it's called Troutdale. It's east of Portland, and about 140 acres. And so when he died, we inherited it, and I moved with my family. And so I went through grade school and high school there, and it was an idyllic growing up. I had horses, we had cattle, and I fished virtually every day and hunted every day, and yeah. So, make a long story short, my family split up. Parents got divorced. I I was at that time a pretty bad student. Really had no interest in academics, but after I graduated high school, I was just in a junior college, community college there, and just I was on the wrestling team, and this is 1968, and the war was going, and yeah, all of a sudden something snapped inside of me, and I got into my Volkswagen. I left all my books on the table at the classroom. Got into my Volkswagen Bug and drove downtown Portland. Walked into the Army recruiter's office, and I'll never forget. It was lunchtime, so there was only one guy there, and he was a big black guy. He was a master sergeant, and he was all the way to the other side of the room, and he had his feet up on his desk, and he was reading a newspaper. And I strutted over and stood in front of his desk, and he slowly lowers his newspaper, and I barked. I said, "I want to be a paratrooper." And the guy, he goes, "Son, I can fix you right up." So I was gone in like 2 days. It was like, so that was the beginning of, so I ended up becoming a paratrooper, and Vietnam was going strong. Most all of my classmates were being sent to Vietnam, mostly back to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, which was getting terrible casualties. This is early '69, but unbeknownst to me and the gods that oversaw my life, whatever, I was selected to go to Alaska with an Arctic paratroop company, trained in cold weather, um, long range reconnaissance, long range or cold weather parachuting, mountaineering. Um, and so that was my, what they considered back then, overseas assignment. So by this time I was a sergeant, and after that I was sent to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I served out my active duty. So I got an early out, and by this time, boy, I really actually the Army did something really good for me. I was lucky to come through it like I did. Um, but I had a thirst to go back to college, to go back to school. I think by this time I was 21. I had confidence in myself that I could, actually pursue, um, seriously some academic studies. And I've always loved history. So anyway, so I got out of the Army. I was at the University of Oregon. I was studying. And also, I've always been an artist. I've always been drawing. It's one of the few things I found that I was pretty good at and got some sort of, positive feedback in. But to make, and Oh, I applied and was accepted into a special forces unit, the 12th group, which is it's disbanded now, I think, but it was up in Portland, Oregon. Um, so I was in this SF unit for a while, and then then as I mentioned earlier with you, Mike, I heard about smoke jumping, and so I applied. I wrote letters. This is before the internet, and somehow I got base managers' names of all the bases and wrote personal letters of introduction. And anyway, um, it was a complete blessing on my part. I got accepted to the North Cascades base up in Winthrop, Washington. Bill Moody, the base manager, was hiring guys, vets primarily, and for a rookie class. And so that started the whole my whole jumping career. Well, the 13 years of jumping. Yeah, I remember specifically. It must have been the spring of like um, '69, I guess. But as I mentioned, I was in Arctic Paratroop Company, and it was um, pretty intense training and pretty intense work. Um, and we were standing in formation. I'll never forget this. And this is adjacent to the airfield there um, at Fort Wainwright. And here comes an old DC 3, and it's climbing out over the runway. And the guy next to me, he goes, "Oh, those are those crazy bastards, smoke jumpers. those crazy guys parachute into forest fires." And I go, "What? What?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah. It's kind of yeah." And then at first I'd never heard of it. So in the back of my mind, I go, "Wow, that sounds kind of cool." So anyway, so that was my. I'll never forget my first introduction to what a smoke jumper was, and it was most appropriate that it was an old DC-3 flying pulling out of Fairbanks. But yeah, yeah. So anyway,
That's great. Okay, then, yeah.
yeah. So
Yep, that's great. Go ahead back with what you were going to. I'll cut that bit out and put it in the other
okay,
bit before
yeah.
you became a subject.
So I ended up. Uh, I was going to college, of course, during the winter, and I was just about ready to get my history degree, and but I was taking more and more art classes, and I had some just tremendous professors. And I can mention that. I think I talked to you earlier, Mike, about that professor that really was kind of steered me along with my art career. But uh, but I was jumping, of course, during the summer and coming back to Oregon, University of Oregon, and studying. But yeah, so the part of that story is too that one of my professors, Alan Hamer, was a former colonel in the Air Force. He flew B-24s in the Pacific, and amazing guy. And he was also an amazing artist. And he became my mentor and really a wonderful friend. Yeah, I was one of the few veterans in the art department, and so him being a full bird colonel, um, it was anyway. He kind of took me under his wing, as you can imagine. But I'll never forget. He took me into his office, and this is after I decided I was going to change my major and really pursue the painting academically. And he goes, "Davis, you're parachuting into forest fires in the middle of nowhere. Um, I want you to paint that. That's going to be your graduating thesis." And he said, "I want you to." He goes, "Can you jump with a sketchbook when you're on fires?" And I go, "Yeah, all the time." And I've been doing it a lot. And he goes, "Well, let's work on that." He goes, "I'll talk you through it, and we'll." So for 2 years, I developed this whole series of paintings. Um, for my graduating thesis, I got my bachelor's in fine arts, and I had this whole body of work, and this is like in the uh, early '80s. And that's how I lucked out. There was, there's so many things, lucky breaks I've had in my life. But the Alaska State Museum gave me a one-man exhibition of my paintings. It was called the Smokejumpers of Alaska, and they took a couple of my paintings into the collection. And then I applied to the same kind of thing. This is still before the internet, but I found out the direct name of the director of the Smithsonian. And, this is back in the days of 35 millimeter slides. And I sent, a proposal and examples of my smoke jumping paintings. And anyway, they gave me a one-man exhibition in the Air and Space Museum for an 18 months exhibition, and they took a couple into their collection, 3 actually. So it was kind of I always say it was my lucky break as an artist for sure, and it wasn't. And I always clarify this: it wasn't that I was a great artist. I'm much better now, I think, but it was more that I was actually a smoke jumper, and that I pursued art academically, and I had pursued it. And so anyway, it was a lucky break. And the director, his name was Don Lopez, amazing guy. He flew with Chenault in China with Flying Tigers. Yeah, amazing guy. I can remember having conversations with him, and here was this, amazing warrior pilot, and just a very, very poised, dignified gentleman. And anyway, it was a real, it was a wonderful experience for that. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, I think somehow the military saw my work and heard about me, and I was approached if I would like to do a painting of my military days for the Pentagon. And so I ended up doing a pretty large painting of a C-130, a Hercules with a stick of paratroopers coming out. And that's in the Pentagon right now. So that's kind of how that all worked out. Yeah. So fast forward, jump 13 years. After I graduated, I moved down to the Bay Area, and so I would paint during the winter and then jump. I was jumping in Alaska now for BLM. So my life was, like, as you know, Mike, seasonal. 5 months up there and down here, and painting. And I had an art studio, live-in art studio in Emeryville, right there between Oakland and Berkeley. But I met a woman, great. We're still wonderful friends. She was my first wife and the mother of our daughter. But she's just a retired judge right now. Anyway, she was a DA at the time, and this nomadic existence, being a jumper, it's not conducive to relationships, as you know well, Mike. So anyway, make a long story short, I applied and got hired as a firefighter. Down in Belmont, San Carlos, down on the peninsula, and so I ended up there for 23 years. And about halfway through, they sent me to an academy, and I passed my probation period and became a firefighter. But then, as a jumper, I was always interested in emergency medicine. And I was part of the EMT, the Emergency Medical Technicians team with the smoke jumpers. And we would jump. We had trained, we would have trauma supplies, we'd have IV fluids. And back then, we actually even had morphine. And we also had Narcan in case we gave too much morphine, but I got excited. But anyway, it was overseen by a physician there in Fairbanks, who was a military doc, who was really instrumental in helping us get this whole, EMT program together. But anyway, I've always been interested in that. And my fire department knew of my interest, and they offered to send me to paramedic school. And so that opened up my whole life, becoming a firefighter paramedic. And that eventually led to me, in this whole other aspect of my life, being a volunteer um, with these medical teams overseas, of which I'm still a part of. Um, yeah, like you, my many countries and numerous different medical teams, and these teams are pretty amazing. They remind me a lot of the organizations, and the camaraderie actually remind me a lot of jumping. Um, these are individuals that are very good at what they do, professionals. I mean, they're docs, they're nurse practitioners, they're RNs, they're paramedics. Really, just hardworking with big hearts, know what they're doing, and get just a real task oriented group. And it's just a delight working with these people. These are my lifelong friends now, along with my jumper buddies. But yeah, so I started going on. So I retired um, as a firefighter paramedic, and I'm still painting. I have my art studio here in Marin County, in San Rafael. And so I started to apply. Actually, I was still in the fire department, but I started to apply for these different teams. The first, I started going to Haiti with small mobile medical teams as a paramedic. We would go to these rural villages, and Haiti is just God, just it's has a terrible history, as you know. It's just impoverished and corrupt, and so these poor people have no health care. And so we were really providing some really great service with these mobile medical teams. And so I started doing that with Haiti. And then 2014, the Ebola crisis happened in Liberia. And we all remember that. That was a terrible thing. By this time, I was married to my second wife, Crystal, who's has her master's degree in public health and also was a paramedic, but she was a supervisor, and um, she was also instrumental in me passing my paramedic exams. I mean, she was an instructor um, in uh, in cardiac and pediatrics, and anyway, she really helped me get through. It was a hard course. When I started, there was 12 of us that started, and only 6 of us finished to pass the national board exams. But anyway, I applied to Ebola was happening. I was thinking, with my background, I might be good. It might be useful. It was happening in Liberia, West Africa, and also Sierra Leone. And it was right at the infancy of the Ebola, and the crisis was just taking off. And anyway, so I applied. I sent a resume, I think, to Heart International, which is one of the big NGO, non-governmental organizations that are charity-based. It's a non-religious, it's not a Christian-based NGO, but they do incredible work all over the world. It's much like, much like Doctors Without Borders or the International Medical Corps, which I also got involved with too. But anyway, so yeah, it was pretty funny. They called and they said, "Well, we need you to go to Liberia to treat Ebola patients," and they go, "We need you to go for 6 to 8 weeks. And by the way, can you leave day after tomorrow?" So it was like my wife, bless her heart, Crystal, scrambled to get everything together, packing and Anyway, I was out the door and met up with my team in Dakar, and then they flew us into Monrovia, which is the capital of Liberia, and we underwent about a week's training um, in how to, the treatment protocols for Ebola patients, and also um, equally important is donning and doffing the protective gear, which was critical, as you can imagine. So it was an eye opener. So they sent us to my team. There was six of us on my team. I was the only paramedic. The rest were nurses, or we had a couple wonderful docs. One was an Army doc, and just incredible team. I mean, just hardworking and dedicated and compassionate. And so we set to work. After our training, they were training teams from all over the world that were coming into the country. And actually, it was put on a lot by the U.S. military. And so then after the training, they dispersed us and assigned us to various rural locations. And we were way the hell out, probably 4 or 5 hours from Monrovia, way out in the, a very hard struck area, rural area of Liberia. And we started setting up the Quonset huts and started instantly seeing patients, and a lot of fatalities, of course. It's a terrible virus. It was a horrible thing to see. It was hitting, infants all the way up to the elderly. And we were having, unlike some of the other teams that were in other locations, we were actually having some pretty high success rates with our survivals. We would go in, you've seen pictures, you're donned with all the protective gear, mask, gown, rubber gloves, boots, and just completely encapsulated. And this is before there was any kind of vaccines, and our job basically was to keep them hydrated. And so if you can imagine trying to start an IV on somebody that's in shock, with little blood pressure and very little veins because their blood pressure is so low, because they're bleeding out, they're vomiting, they're diarrhea. And so anyway, very difficult to get IVs going. And that's how we were keeping them alive, is by fluids. So it was an intense experience. You coming out of these Ebola treatment units and you're just covered in Ebola. You can, you are. And, everything is just, talk about tunnel vision. You are just focused on everything you're doing because of the extreme hazards of what you've got on you. And so the decontamination process is elaborate. Being sprayed with 3% chlorine for every item of gear you're doffing, and you're finally, you're down to your underwear. And so that went on for weeks. And as I say, we also trained. Another thing too is when we got there, which is right in the early stage, the entire medical hierarchy of Liberia had been decimated. They were all dead because these people would, nobody knew what it was. And so you'd have these doctors and nurses and healthcare people treating these very sick, ill people, and then they'd end up dying. And so there was virtually nobody left in the Liberian, health hierarchy. And so we would train people, and they would also act as our interpreters. So I would work with well, we work as a team. One of my best buddies, he's still one of my best friends, John. We've been everywhere together now since then, and I'll talk about that later too if you want. We were in Iraq, and we were in Ukraine, we were in Greece with the refugees, and anyway, he's one of my best buddies, and he's a great RN. Um, I just love working with this guy, and he's taught me so much. But anyway, so he and I were paired up, and that's how our friendship, really the infancy of our friendship. But and then we would have Liberians there to act as our interpreters, as you with your overseas might, how valuable that is. And so yeah, so once I got my foot, it's like anything, you get your life on paper about what you've done and where you've been, and then these doors just opened up. These teams would be asking me to deploy. I'd get phone calls saying, I think when I returned, well, I was the first one in Marin County to return from an Ebola mission. So it was kind of a big deal. The protocols were not in place about, how to deal with me as a potential carrier of Ebola. And so it was a pretty elaborate. I was in quarantine for about, I think I can't remember, around at least a month, and through the health service. And I couldn't, I had to sleep in a separate bedroom. I couldn't have any contact with people. As I mentioned, I'm an artist, and I asked them if I could go to my art studio and work. And they said, well, you can do that, but you can't talk to anybody. You can't have any closer than 5 feet. And also I'd have to take my temperature every day, because that was the first indication that you were carrying the virus, is you got a spike in your body temperature. And fortunately, everything was fine. It was pretty funny. I should mention this. My art studio is part of a building that has 33 studios in it, and I'd be in my studio that has a glass door on it, and my friends would come and they'd throw me a sandwich over the top of the door. Yeah, it was pretty funny. But anyway, after I was deemed Ebola free, yeah, that's when the phone would ring pretty consistently. I can remember one team, I get a phone call and they go, we need you to be on a mobile medical team. Vanuatu got hit by a cyclone and devastated. We need you on a 6-man fast mobile medical team. And they go, can you go? And I go, yeah. And I go, where in the hell's Vanuatu though? It's in I didn't know this. It's in the New Hebrides, north of the Solomons, which that area, Mike. But yeah, and then I was in Cambodia with another team. I was also in Ethiopia with another team called Reach Another Foundation. And then that terrible Greek tragedy, when the Syrian civil war started, and you remember this, Mike, it was just thousands of refugees were fleeing Syria and going into Turkey, and then trying to come across the Aegean into Greece, Lesbos, Greece. And so there was an English team, can't remember the name of it, but they asked me to be a team leader on this a medical team to triage these refugees at the shoreline. And so I ended up being there on Lesbos, and this is just, it was on my own dime. This is a real fly-by-night kind of team, but I mean, as far as they didn't provide any logistics, so it was an expensive thing for me to do. Up to that point, all these teams, they at least, it was all volunteer, but they at least would get you there, and they'd at least, get you fed and get you a place to sleep. But anyway, this was one of the first, but it's a critical thing with, just literally 2,000 refugees a day coming across in these just leaky rubber boats, just terrified, landing on the shores in Lesbos all hours of the night. Some we were doing, virtually cliff rescues, getting these refugees up. And so my job, I had a wonderful team of actually, I think I was the only, there was 2 Americans, and I had like 8 people, but we had English, I had Israelis, wonderful group. And so we all just, we would triage these patients right at the water's edge and get them, get them cycled. There wasn't a lot of medical. It was more like just making sure they're safe and getting them transported to the larger refugee camps. And so, yeah, I think that was it. And then I'm trying to think of the whole sequence here, but the big one for me was Iraq. It was, I got a call. They were setting up a TSP, which is called a trauma stabilization point. And it's for, it was through New York City medics. And they were sending a team to Mosul to attach to the Iraqi military. And for me, so this is the first time I'd been in an active war zone, and it was an active war zone. Initially, I was there twice. Initially, it was going to be a 2-week assignment, and I ended up being there 6 weeks. I mean, I was there right at the beginning of the offensive against ISIS. Mosul is the second largest city in Iraq, and ISIS controlled it. And they had thousands of Iraqis that were virtually prisoners in the city. They were just under horrific conditions. These are all just fanatical jihadists, these ISIS, and really barbarians. I saw similar barbaric behavior in Ukraine from the Russians, but this was my first exposure to outright evil. And as I mentioned, it was also my exposure to combat. And we were right on the front lines. And it was the real deal. We were getting, the reason I ended up extending, because we were just getting inundated with, just literally dozens of casualties every day. Everything from bullet wounds to shrapnel wounds to amputations to eviscerations to burns, not only with Iraqi military, but also with Iraqi civilians. And we were getting entire families that had been shot by ISIS that were trying to escape under a white flag, and ISIS was shooting the entire, women and children. And you'd have an entire family with gunshot wounds. And so, and for me, being a paramedic, as you know, paramedics, they're basically trained more in trauma. And so this was really my bailiwick, really. I mean, and also with my military background. So I felt that I was really contributing to this. And I was with my buddy, John, who's, as I mentioned, is just a terrific RN and also has a lot of trauma experience working in the emergency room in Vermont. But it was, it was like the real deal. I remember the first day of the offensive and just everything going off. And also ISIS was trying to get us. There was bodies that were about a quarter of a mile. They ambushed a group supposedly are trying to get us, because we were actually providing a very valuable service to the Iraqi military. We'd get people with, minor gunshots, maybe in the arm or leg, that we could patch up, and they're so dedicated to get back into the fight and rejoin their unit that, we were actually, for minor injuries, we were getting people turned around and getting them, back in the fight. And but our main goal was, as I say, was a trauma stabilization point. So we would get these patients, evaluate them, get IVs going, stop their bleeding, just get them stabilized until we could get them to transport them to more definitive care. That's where surgeons would be available. So anyway, that was our whole purpose. And we would work 1 or 2 days and then pack up and then move right along the front lines, right into Mosul itself. And this is like urban. But apparently, the Battle of Mosul was the largest urban combat since the Second World War. And I believe it. It was like block to block. And we had a lot of suicide-borne vehicles. There's an acronym for it. Suicide vehicle, BBBs, I think it was. And a lot of IEDs, improvised explosive devices that were blowing up our ambulances and getting mortared. One of our team, anyway, it was one of our Iraqis was killed by a mortar right outside just only a couple hundred feet from where we were treating patients. But it was the real deal. And I ended up 6 weeks. By that time I was pretty well burned out, and I needed a break. And I mean, we're talking, as you can imagine, this is you're on call 24 hours a day because you have no idea when these people are coming in, these patients. And we had wonderful bonds with these Iraqis. Mostly they were providing the ambulances. They were going out and getting their patients and bringing them to us, and they were losing guys. I think my first night there, we lost 4 in an ambulance they were ambushed by ISIS. And I can remember a 21-year-old 21-year-old Iraqi lieutenant who was their team leader, and he wasn't. It was the first time he'd ever lost any of his men in combat, and he just lost it. He was completely distraught, and it was a really a sad thing to see, and he felt really, he was guilt ridden. I'll never forget. He was just we were sitting around a fire, and he was just sobbing, and for whatever reason it happened. It was the right thing to do, but I had Leatherman, one of those Leatherman tools, and I undid my belt and took this Leatherman tool. I'm still in the sheath, and just presented it to him, and he was like, just the gesture, and the Kayafa, I'm pronouncing it correctly. Anyway, he took his off and put it on me, and I think it helped him, kind of just broke him out of whatever it was, this anguish that he was going through. But so we had some really wonderful relationships with these Iraqis, and you've seen this, Mike, in Afghanistan. You get to know these people, and yeah. So I came home, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of just breathe. There's a word kind of coming out of. I just needed a break, and of course the fighting was still going on. And then they asked me maybe a month later if I could go back. And for the final, by this time, the Iraqi military had pretty well focused in um, the fighting to about a 3 or 4 square block, maybe a little more, but it was, they were finally overcoming ISIS. And so I got back there and I was with a different team, we were doing the same mission, but yeah. And so we were really concerned about suicide bombers then because there was a flood of refugees coming out, and some were packing, suicide vests, and there was still some vehicle-borne uh, suicide vehicles. They captured one. I have a picture of it. It's like a Toyota with welded sheet metal around it, steel plates around it, with a welded visuals. But um, it was packed with 2,000 pounds of Semtex, Czech plastic explosives, and they killed the driver. So before it detonated, but anyway, it was always a constant concern about the suicides, and yeah, and it was a difficult time too to get any kind of rest because the Iraqis now, they're so pumped up and they're down to, as they say, just a few square blocks of final resistance against these fanatical ISIS fighters. I mean, it's a life and death struggle, and so every time, and everybody, all these Iraqi soldiers um, would have radios, and so every time that they cleared a house of ISIS, they'd come over the radio, and everybody and their aunt and uncle would take their AKs and just blast off full automatic. And so, you're just getting maybe 10 minutes of sleep, and the guy right outside your window is cranking off a full magazine of AK-47 fire, and so it's like, but yeah, it was. And also, I just that brings it. That's the first time I ever saw drones too being used. ISIS, as you know, the first time I'd ever even heard of it, but ISIS was flying drones, and you could hear these damn things coming, and we would duck under, any kind of an awning because there's I don't know much about drone warfare, but apparently, there's some visuals that they can, like the operator can see what the hell's going on. So we would duck under an awning so we'd be out of sight because often they were looking for us. Um, and these Iraqi soldiers, they would go out and just blast away at, trying to. I never saw them actually hit one of these things, but excuse me, it was the first time I ever saw drones. But so anyway, so they finally liberated Mosul. It was huge. It was just an amazing liberation and most of the soldiers that I worked with, the Iraqis, were actually from Mosul. And I don't know if it was intentional that they would assign individuals that knew the town, but they had family members, and the hatred of ISIS was palatable. I mean, believe me, I didn't see many prisoners taken. Um, the hatred of them was great. And I could totally understand that, just seeing, I mean, not to get into the atrocities that I witnessed, but seeing like some of the women that had escaped or been liberated, that had been used for sex slaves. Um, they were just catatonic. It was it was very difficult to see. And fortunately, we had some wonderful women on our team. That, of course, that's the most critical thing with Muslims is woman to woman. I mean, so we had some really wonderful people, women that would jump in and, and help them through that initial stage of recovery, what they could possibly do. But yeah, it was amazing, actually. And so it pretty well prepared me for Ukraine. Um, I think I went to a couple other places. I can't remember the sequence. I've been to so many different places, but Ukraine, the Russians invaded February of 22. And so I was sent I was with a small team. John, my buddy, as I mentioned, and I went, and we joined. There was two paramedics from the UK, both military, former military guys, great guys. So it was kind of it was with global outreach doctors, and we were on the ground right when the Soviets they had just been kicked out of the fighting north of Kiev. You might have heard, Mike, the atrocities that were uncovered in a place called Bucha and Irpin, which is just on the outskirts, just north of the capital of Kiev. But it was right up there with Mosul. As far as the destruction, the buildings, bodies still in the vehicles, bodies still in the streets, horrific atrocities by the Russians. I heard estimated 400 that were executed, just still, and women and children. And so, yeah, so we were there pretty early on, and there was four of us, and we had, I think, 3 ambulances. So we were transporting patients, and we were delivering supplies, going wherever they needed us. And we ended up going all the way over to the Donbass. We crisscrossed the entire length of Ukraine twice, actually. So it was the first time I'd ever been in that country. It's a beautiful country, but seeing the devastation, but just the amazing amount of Russian hardware that had been destroyed was just amazing. The Ukrainians, first time I'd ever been around Ukrainians, and my heart is just full of admiration for these people. They hated the Russians and what they were doing, and they were some serious adversaries, and professional fighters. And I was very, very impressed. And they were so appreciative of any foreign help at all. And we were there, I think, 6 weeks, and we started getting the logistics set up. We were first on the ground, so it was right at the infancy of getting things rolling as far as how we work as a team and where we're going to be sent and what we can do and where these hospitals are located that we can transport patients. And so it was, and then also logistics centers where we could tap in, because we didn't want to go out with an empty ambulance. We wanted to go out with food and water, and also pet food. These Ukrainians love their animals, and so that was almost as important as food to them. So fortunately, supplies were coming into the country, and we would go out with just packed to the rim with food and water, and then coming back packed to the rim with refugees, or transporting patients, and treating patients too. So, yeah. Anyway, God, I'm kind of rambling on here, Mike. Wow. Yeah. Hope you didn't run out of tape.
No, it's great, Davis. Hey, I've got something I would like to ask you, I'm just thinking of is one, do you think what draws us to situations to want to go to different conflict areas like you and I have both? Do you think it's something that the smoke jumping did to us or the parachuting did to us, or do you think it's something within our personalities? And the other part of the question I'd like to ask you to tag on to that is, why do you do this? Why do you put yourself in harm's way to help others?
Wow, Mike. I would say I would say it's somewhat of a combination of several factors. One, I would think of like being a smoke jumper. You you were you were damn good firefighters, as you know. Um, you were really good at what you did, and you had a reputation of being really good at what you did. Um, and so I draw an analogy with that, with being a paramedic and having some experience, um, being being good and feeling that you can contribute um, to a unique situation, really. And I would say that's a was a big part of it for me. I got tremendous amount of satisfaction. There would be times I'll never forget, like specific times where all of a sudden, and a lot of people can relate to this. All of a sudden, you just get a flash of the reality of where you are, and it could be like in a war zone. You're working on, patients are coming, something, whatever's happening, but suddenly you get a just a sudden realization of where you are at that very moment in your life and what you're doing. And I can remember some of those you know thoughts coming into my mind and feeling distinctly that I was in the right place at the right time, doing what I should, where I should be. And it was pretty profound coming to that, you know, think come and quick. It'd be a flash that I'm here, I'm doing what I should be doing, what, maybe I was put in here on earth for. I have no idea. I kind of think I'm not a religious guy, but I think I'm a spiritual person. And so that is part of it. A second part would be, and we talked about this earlier, is the camaraderie. Um, and you saw it being a smoke jumper as well. That is a huge part of it. You get to know these people that are on these teams, and it's a lot like being a smoke jumper. Everybody has, and you can relate to this. Everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. In a given task, everybody is really good at something, and sometimes and other things they're not quite as competent. There's somebody else that is much better at it, and working together with that and coming to the realization that there might be somebody better at that situation, or maybe a procedure or whatever, and somebody jumps in, and without any ill effect or any kind of negative, impact on your professionalism, and that comes with experience, and that trust that comes with working with somebody in some very austere situations. And it's wonderful being on these teams. I should mention too that there's no real hierarchy. There's always a team leader, but it's not like the doctors, being a physician, is always in charge. It could be I could be in charge, like or it could be an RN or a nurse practitioner, whatever, who's ever like at that moment the best for the team. And like, everybody, that's another thing. There's no there's no slackers on these teams. You wouldn't be there if you were a slacker in any way. You have to you have to, it's a confirmation, really, maybe adding on to your point, it's a confirmation of your history, possibly, of your professionalism and how you can handle yourself in those situations, because that gets out. That gets out in this whole realm of emergency response teams. That somebody's a hard worker, somebody is competent at what they do, and actually can be fun to be around. Has something to offer. Like in Nepal, for instance, here's an example. Nepal, I was there for the massive earthquake, and we were up in we were the first Western team to make it into the foothills of the Himalayas, and I'd never seen such, other than war zones, devastation, natural devastation. There would be entire villages that were just wiped off the sides of the mountain, and so I was with an 8-person team, and we had, I think, like 25 porters, Sherpas, that were ferrying. This is with Heart to Heart International, and we were ferrying supplies up, and we'd go hike from village to village, and and start treating patients. And this is where, and we had, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 docs on this team. We had really top-notch providers, nurse practitioners, and so being a paramedic, I wasn't needed as often, say, as a doctor who can really perform some procedures that were in my skill level. So what I would do, and it was wonderful. They knew my background. I mean, everybody knew my background, and so I would be a point person, and I would take off up these mountain trails to the next village just by myself, and I would hike for hours, and I had some rudimentary maps, but and occasionally some villagers would accompany me, but mostly I was by myself, and I'd go to the next village and do a quick survey about what we were going to need, about the number of casualties that I saw, the facilities, also whether or not there was going to be any kind of helicopter access, if that was going to be available, which was limited, very limited. So anyway, I was kind of the recon guy, is what I'm saying, and I felt really good in that role, and so that kind of relates to what I'm talking about, the teams, the skill sets of every individuals, and like I say, having women on the team was wonderful, dealing with women patients, especially in other cultures, as you know. So, and these are my lifelong friends. These are people that I care about, and it's almost like it's a jumper. It's a fraternity. If there's something happening in the world, people were saying, what do you think? Should we go? And should we call? What do you think? Who's going to be available? So it's a networking, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So getting back, it is that camaraderie, which is wonderful to experience. I never felt anything outside of the jumpers, as you know. I've never felt anything like that, and it's a magical thing to have, really. Yeah. I don't know.
Davis, thank you for your time and sharing all this with all of us. And you have had a fascinating life, and you still are. It's an honor to get a chance to get to know you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you.
We're doing this for all of you. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. See you next time.